Good day, folks. If you play games like Stardew Valley or Fields of Mistria, you might have noticed that some objects turn translucent if the player sprite moves behind them. If you'd like to do something similar in your GameMaker project, this video is for you. So I have a player that's able to move around right now. If my player sprite goes behind the pine tree is hiding my player sprite as intended due to the depth differences. However, I want the pine tree to have a bit of translucency so I can witness or observe what my player sprite is looking at behind the tree itself. So first of all, how do we define our player sprite as being behind the sprite of the pine itself? So one quick way we can check is if the x boundaries of our player sprite are within the x boundaries of the pine tree, and also checking if the y boundaries are within of the player sprite is within the y boundaries of the pine tree. But let's start with checking for the x boundaries first. So now I'm going to check the obj interactable object I have here. This is just the parent object for my pine tree. I'm going to just uncomment this block and this block here. Essentially, I have a local variable that stores the midpoint of my left and right boundary boxes for the player sprite. And I'm checking if that midpoint is in range between the boundary box left and the boundary box right of the pine tree itself. If it is, it's going to change the image alpha to 0.5, making it translucent. Otherwise, it's going to reset it back to 1. And this is in range function is just a custom function, but it's pretty straightforward. Just checking if the value is within the min and max provided. So now if I rerun GameMaker, I'm going to see that it's turning translucent as I want it to, but it's also turning the trees to the back of me translucent, the ones that I'm not hiding behind. And that's because we're not checking if our y boundaries are within. So let's move on to add the y boundary block. So let's go back to obj interactable. I'm going to comment out lines 18-20. I'm going to uncomment lines 12 to 15 and line 2. So now I'm adding a new check to see if the player sprite's y boundaries are within the boundary box top and bottom of the pine sprite itself. And we'll rerun GameMaker. But we can see that it's not turning translucent anymore for the pine trees on the front and back. And to find out why, if you look at the documentation for the boundary box itself, it's a read-only variable that is tied to the mask or the collision mask. And if you go to the sprite of the pine tree, in my case, my collision mask here is manually set or declared by me. It's only representing the very bottom of the tree. If I were to pull it all the way to the top of the drawn sprite, this should cover the y boundaries that I want, but it's also going to prevent my player sprite from going to the back of the tree, since this is the collision mask. So instead, I'm going to put back the collision mask to how it was before. But instead, I'm going to use the drawn sprites y top and y bottom. And to do so, I'm just going to comment out lines 12 to 15 again and uncomment out lines 4 to 10. Over here, I'm now checking for the drawn y top and bottom of the pine sprite. So you can access it through self.y, in this case within the parent. And if I want the bottom, I can just take the y top and add the sprite height to it, since the sprite height is literally just the height of the pine tree. So all I'm doing is having the same code block as 12 to 15, but I'm just changing the b box top with drawn y top and the b box bottom with drawn y bottom. If I were to rerun this in GameMaker, I can see now that it's rendering the translucency as I want to, where my player is behind. And if I move away, it's setting it back to opaque. And it's no longer hiding the pine trees behind me until I go behind them. Thank you all for watching. If you have any better ideas on how to do this, do share it and comment below, as I'm pretty new to GameMaker as well. If not, till the next time, take care.